At 21 years old, after being raised independent fundamental Baptist, dedicating my life to Christ, graduating from an evangelical Christian university, and getting a job at a Christian homeless shelter, I found myself no longer able to believe that Christianity was true. The faith was everything to me, my source of purpose, the foundation of morality, the basis of my view of cosmology, my answer to existential anxiety, and the common ground in every single relationship I had. Without sufficient reason to believe Christianity was true, though, I had to leave all of that behind. That was about 5.5 years ago now, and while the life where I upheld the faith feels more distant and alien than ever, it's only recently become clear to me how much Christian programming still influences my inner world. I suppose that a few years ago I thought that disavowing Christianity and leaving its communities was nearly all that was necessary to de-Christianize one's mind. Deconversion was most of the picture, I thought. The journey was largely behind me, the destination had been reached. I cannot and do not think that way anymore, though. This is why the term deconstruction now appeals to me more than deconversion. Realistically, leaving behind one's worldview, especially one that was meticulously programmed into you throughout your formative years, it doesn't happen in one fell swoop. It's a process, one that takes constant emotional labor, tedious introspection, and diligent self-care. For me, deconstruction better describes the process by which I've increased my independence from the faith, while also indicating that this process is still ongoing. I know that many of you out there can relate, so in hopes of encouraging others to speak openly about their ongoing deconstruction, I'd like to share a few things I'm still deconstructing over 5 years into this journey. Naturally, not all of the ideas I'll share here are fully formed, so just keep that in mind as we continue. My worldview as the exclusive path to moral behavior. There are absolutely not multiple paths to God, I was taught. The road to God's kingdom, to truth, to morality is narrow. If you want to do what's right, there's only one way. Period. When I left Christianity and began rebuilding my understanding of morality, I held on to this notion in a way. I regularly saw well-intentioned people harm others as a result of their factually incorrect beliefs informing unwittingly harmful behavior. This led me to conclude that the key to promoting well-being was the propagation of ideology which championed empiricism and naturalism as necessary to informed moral decision-making. If everyone was a critical thinker, atheist, and naturalist like me, I thought, the world would be in much better order. Today, I still think that poorly informed beliefs do regularly inform harmful actions. Countless deaths have resulted from widespread ignorance of epidemiology in the last 2 years, for instance. Considering my naturalistic worldview and those who uphold it to be necessarily less prone to the adoption of false beliefs, though, I've realized is an unrealistic and tribal way of thinking. Now, I'm well aware that there is a body of data which suggests that atheists and naturalists tend to value critical thinking a bit more than most populations, while also being more scientifically and religiously literate on average than most. Still, though, that fact is not reason enough to conclude that atheism and naturalism exclusively lead to well-informed moral behavior. Can it be harmful to believe things that aren't true? Yes. If something is not true, is believing that thing harmful? Well, I used to answer yes, because a false belief has the potential to wrongly inform moral behavior. But I've since realized if I'm claiming that certain beliefs are harmful, I need to demonstrate that on a case-by-case basis. Beliefs which are true, after all, also have the potential to inform moral behavior in a harmful way. If you need an example of that as a fellow atheist or naturalist, just look at any atheist public figure who uses their rejection of superstition and fundamentalist Christian myths to lord their intellectual superiority over and constantly berate religious people who call into their experience of a live show. This abusive behavior can even be wrongly excused in atheist spaces because those in them rightly believe that atheists tend to value critical thought a little more than most. Being right excuses the abuse of might, some atheists seem to think. On top of all of that, there are religious people of diverse backgrounds and persuasions who can and do exhibit well-informed moral behavior, such that I have no reason to dissuade them of their religious ideas, even if I think they're factually wrong. There can even be massive social and political advantages to working with religiously diverse people for the sake of achieving common goals. Many pagans and progressive Abrahamics have proved useful allies in advocating for tolerance and human rights. Why not work with them? My worldview is not some kind of key to morality, and I now see that thinking that it was probably stemmed from my former evangelical Christianity. Asceticism as a necessity for long-term happiness. Asceticism is the practice of the denial of physical or psychological desires in order to attain a spiritual ideal or goal. While those with a conservative Protestant upbringing like myself may not have been taught this term, many of us were instructed in its practice. Your purpose in life is to commune with God and glorify Him, so you need to avoid distractions from that. Don't get intoxicated in any way, don't go to loud parties, don't spend more time on entertainment than study and prayer, don't use psychedelics, and don't engage with your sexual desires except in extremely specific instances. Basically, don't do anything which could provoke a state of ecstasy, except maybe Christian ritual or worship. Having been a fundamental Baptist, I was instructed and expected to live a fairly ascetic lifestyle, even though almost no one involved in my upbringing even knew what the term ascetic means. The Rolling Stones song Satisfaction was used as an example in countless sermons. If you give in to the desires of the flesh and partake of the pleasures of this world, you'll only end up like the song's protagonist, in search of satisfaction that will never, ever come. I was a pretty good and consistent ascetic. Even when I left Christianity, I didn't change my lifestyle at all. God was no longer a part of my rationale, but I still practiced strict self-discipline for the sake of attaining to some higher state of being, one where I believed I'd experience greater peace and contentment. I still had an idea that intense pleasure would not only distract me from important things, but would corrupt me in destroying my ability to find happiness and contentment without intense pleasure. So my asceticism became a practical route to long-term fulfillment and, somewhat paradoxically, to happiness. A few years went by without much change there, but eventually I had a few experiences which broke from my ascetic habits. Strangely, I actually came away from those experiences with a sense of fulfillment that improved my overall sense of well-being even after they were over. They didn't prevent me from feeling fulfilled or content in everyday life at all. Rather quickly, I began to see that some of my views on ecstatic or even just pleasurable experiences were driven by fear. Fear which my fundamentalist community programmed into me to keep me from exploring anything outside of its realm of control. Since then, I've explored more things which are off limits to a good ascetic, and I've come away from that with a better understanding of who I am and what contributes to my sense of well-being. Moderation is hugely important, as constantly chasing ecstasy can be quite unhealthy, but asceticism driven by fear can be unhealthy as well. These days, I'm still pretty low-key most of the time. Most of my time is spent studying or skating, and I'm definitely not a partier. What I am is informed by experience and careful thought, capable of making healthy choices for good reasons rather than overly cautious choices out of fear. Ironically, the discipline and maturity which asceticism is supposed to deliver, I only gained after defying my ascetic practice and coming to understand pleasure and moderation in my own terms. Emotional ties to the in-group protecting narratives of Christianity. I just realized I forgot about Carl, so I'm going to set him up now. Okay. Religious communities, especially conservative or insular religious communities, often strongly believe in and propagate narratives about outsiders, especially apostates. I've spoken about this before on my channel, and the video I released just prior to this one even discusses the cognitive biases which drive these narratives. One of these narratives which influenced me as a teenager was Christian kids go to a secular college, learn new things, and let that turn them away from God or make them think they're just too smart to believe in God. This narrative motivated me as an 18-year-old to attend an evangelical university so I wouldn't fulfill that narrative. When I graduated and deconstructed my faith shortly thereafter, I didn't think I would fulfill that narrative in my Christian community's thinking since I went to an evangelical school. But I was wrong. They still saw my experience as perfectly in line with that narrative. To this day, nothing I could possibly say would inform their thinking about me more than that narrative from their tribe. Fast forward to the last couple of years where I've broken from some of my ascetic, Christian-approved habits. I've learned from the spinning of the previous narrative that there's not much use in trying to inform my former community, which includes my loved ones, of the nuances of my thinking and behavior in order to counter their narratives. So if and when I'm considering doing something they'd consider sinful, even if it's a significant life event for me, I decidedly do not share that with them at all. Still, though, I find myself worrying that if they found out, another evangelical narrative would be invoked. He left God because he wants to sin. Just look at the way he lives now. On the other hand, though, if they knew that narrative of theirs was giving me stress, they'd have another narrative to spin. He knows in his heart that what he's thinking of doing is a sin. He knows God's law is written on his heart. This is what's so frustrating about these narratives. I'm damned if I do, and damned if I don't. These narratives are created to facilitate in-group cohesion and confirm Christian bias completely regardless of what happens. It doesn't matter what I do, because these narratives are not tied to reality. They don't actually explain anything. They are pieces of social technology which serve to construct a reality that makes remaining Christian more comfortable. After all, how much easier is it to think, look at that, I've been right all along about everything that happens, than to investigate things humbly, always recognizing that you could be wrong. Obviously, I've been processing all of this for a while, but it still is pretty raw. I understand that it's not my fault if these narratives are spun about me, so I might as well do what I want. Religious indoctrination never makes it easy, though. Recently, I've been considering going back to school for religious studies. I already spend a good deal of my time studying religion for my own enjoyment, so why not just get some credit while I'm at it? Well, because I know narratives would be spun about that too. He's the prodigal son. He's still interested in religion because God isn't done with him yet. He's going to learn something through all that study, which brings him back to God. Just you wait. I know from experience that there's really nothing I can do to subvert that narrative and that decisions about my life should be my own. I'd be lying, though, if I said that narrative doesn't discourage me from pursuing that degree. I'm working on it, and I think that sharing this struggle of mine with people who may relate is part of that. Hopefully one day how I feel about those narratives will be more in line with what I know about those narratives. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have a support system of ex-evangelical friends to help me deal with everything I just talked about here. Not everyone is so lucky, though, so I decided to share all of this on my channel to help those of you going through similar things in your deconstruction see that you're not alone and you're not crazy. I always have resources linked in my description for apostates seeking community and mental health support, like I always say, but I want to draw a bit of extra attention to those resources with this video. If you need to talk to someone about religious trauma, there is a link in the description for the Recovering from Religion Foundation. If you need to find a secular counselor, one who won't spin religious narratives, there is a link to the Secular Therapy Project. There are a couple of other resources linked there too, but I'll leave you with this. Wherever you are in your deconstruction, it is okay to seek support. Put in the effort to find the help you need to stay healthy, and you might be able to pay it forward in the future. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support, even as I've been MIA for a little while. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe and follow me on social media at the handles below. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.